Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I never thought I'd be in this situation at age 62. After all, my life was supposed to be predictable by now. Mornings spent taking care of my garden, afternoons spent reading quietly, and evenings spent with my husband, Mark, reminiscing about the enjoyable old days. But one evening, a private conversation changed everything, leaving me questioning what I thought I knew. It all began with a corporate gala put on by Mark's company, where he had worked for over 30 years. While he was devotedly working his way up the ranks, his boss, Richard Caldwell, was a man of quiet authority. I had only traded pleasantries with him at previous events. He was in his mid-60s, tall, and had an air of quiet confidence that seemed natural. It took place at a fancy hotel in downtown Chicago, where grand chandeliers cast a warm glow over the well-dressed guests. The room was alive with talk, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melody of a live jazz band playing in the corner. I didn't like these events very much. I would have rather stayed at home, but Mark insisted, so I put on a simple navy blue dress and agreed to go with him. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark was talking with his coworkers, and I was talking with the other spouses until Richard came up to me. "Evelyn, may I have a moment?" he asked in a deep voice that carried through the room. I hesitated for a moment, wondering what Mark's boss might want with me, but I smiled lightly and nodded. He led me through a side corridor away from the main ballroom. It was quieter here, with the sounds of the gala fading behind us. He led me to a private lounge with dim lighting, a fireplace, and leather armchairs. The tension in the air was subtle but clear. I could feel my heart beating a little faster as I sat down across from him. "I hope I'm not pulling you away from anything important," he said with a small, almost nervous smile. "Not at all," I told him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of curiosity in my gut. He sighed and rubbed his hands together as if he were trying to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "It's about Mark." I straightened up in my chair, my stomach tightening. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Not exactly, but there's something I think you should know." I could feel the weight of his words before he even said them. I felt uneasy about him because of the gravity in his face. Something quiet that made my heart beat faster quicken. "Evelyn," he said again, his voice soft but strong. "I've known Mark for a long time and have seen him build his career, support his coworkers, and take care of his family. During all of this, I've noticed something." I swallowed hard and looked at him with his eyes locked on mine. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The words struck me deeply. I gasped for air and felt a wave of defensiveness rise through me. "I don't understand," I stuttered. "Mark is a wonderful husband. He's always been." Richard agreed. "I know he is, but Evelyn, when was the last time he really saw you as a woman, not just his wife?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. He spoke in a softer tone. "Now I've seen the way you look at him when he's too busy to notice and watch you stand in the background at events like these while he loses himself in work. You give so much, but does he give back?" I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to say I was wrong, but I didn't want to go too far. "I don't want to offend," Richard said, leaning back a little, "but sometimes someone from the outside can see what people on the inside can't." I slowly let out a breath. My mind was rushing. Richard looked at my face and then gave me a small smile that said, "I know. Evelyn, you should be seen." The words touched a nerve in me I didn't know I had, and I wasn't sure how to feel for the first time in a long time. I just sat there, frozen. Richard's words kept going through my mind, stirring up something I wasn't ready to face. "You deserve to be seen." Had I truly remained unnoticed for such a long time? I wanted to brush off his words as just observation, a kind but wrong attempt at kindness, but I knew he was right. Mark was a good person who worked hard to provide for his family. He was always steady and dependable, but in the quiet moments that mattered, when had he last really looked at me? When had he last noticed the little things I did to keep our life warm and full? Like folding his shirts the way he liked them, keeping our home full of his favorite things, and being by his side through every career triumph and setback. I cleared my throat and pushed down on the lump that had formed there. Richard the First stopped myself with a hand. "I don't mean to make you feel bad," he said. but I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I took a slow breath and said, "Thank you for being honest." Finally, I said in a softer voice than I meant to, "But Mark and I have been together for decades. Marriage isn't just about being seen, it's about commitment and security." Richard nodded and looked at me with a steady gaze. "Have you ever asked yourself what you really want?" The question lingered in the silence between us. "What do you want?" I asked myself. What do I want? I had spent so many years focusing on what Mark needed, what our marriage needed, and what was expected of me that I had never really stopped to think about what I wanted. I let out a small nervous laugh. Richard thought it was funny that they were talking about this at a business gallery. I suppose that's true, but I felt compelled to express it. There was a moment of silence between us, broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace. Then he sighed and stood up, saying, "I should let you get back." I stood there and smoothed out my dress with slightly shaky hands. "Yes, Mark will be wondering where I am." Richard nodded, but there was something else going on in his face that I couldn't read. "Evelyn just promised me one thing." That made me tilt my head. "Don't just brush off what I said. Think about it." I thought about it for a moment and then slowly nodded, "Okay." He gave me a small smile and then stepped aside, pointing toward the door. As I walked past him, I felt his warmth next to me and the weight of the talk still pressing on my chest. When I came back, the gala was still in full swing. Mark was right where I left him, deep in conversation. At first, he didn't see me. I stood back and watched him for a moment. His face was animated, and his hands were moving as he spoke. It was a sight to see him. I had always loved his passion, his drive. But then I thought about what Richard had said, and I wondered if Mark had ever looked at me that way. When he finally looked over and saw me standing there, he gave me a small nod before going back to talking to his coworkers. There was a change in me. Richard had placed a seed, and I couldn't ignore it, even though I knew it was already starting to grow. The drive home was quiet. Mark sat next to me with his hands firmly on the wheel and his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The city lights flashed by quickly, but I wasn't thinking about them. Richard's words were still stuck in my head. His voice said, "You deserve to be seen." I quickly looked at Mark. He looked tired, with just the tiniest sign of stress between his brows. We had been married for nearly 40 years, and in that time I had memorized every detail of his face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. But when was the last time he had really looked at me? He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Did you have a good time tonight?" The question caught me off guard. It was something he asked after every event, every gathering, and every dinner party, almost as if out of obligation rather than genuine curiosity. I hesitated before answering. It was interesting. He nodded absently. "Good." And just like that, the conversation ended. I turned my gaze back toward the window, watching the city slip away as we moved toward the quiet suburbs. When we got home, Mark did what he always did. He took off his jacket, set his keys on the counter, and retreated to his office for one last check of his emails. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the space where he had just been. I wasn't angry at him, not exactly. Mark had always been this way, dedicated to his work, steady in his routines. He had given me a fulfilling life, a secure life, but Richard's words had unearthed something in me, something I couldn't push back down. I walked to the bedroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. 62 years old, my once auburn hair now carried streaks of silver. Faint lines traced my face, reminders of the years I had lived, but my eyes, they were still the same, and in them I saw something I hadn't noticed in a long time: loneliness. I had always assumed that such solitude was just part of aging, this quiet getting faded in the background. Things were slowly becoming normal, but now, for the first time, I wondered what was going on. The next morning, Mark kissed me on the cheek as he left for work and said, "I'll be home late because I have a big client meeting." I nodded and said, "Okay, be safe," and he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a long time before going inside. Usually, I'd run errands, do housework, or garden, but today I felt restless, so before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone and called a number I never thought I'd see. Richard answered on the second ring, and his voice had a hint of surprise in it. I took a deep breath and asked, "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" There was a pause, and then he said, "Of course." An hour later, I was sitting across from him at a quiet cafe near the lake, where the air smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries while leaves danced in the wind outside. Richard gave me a quiet, interested look. While I stirred my coffee and watched the cream swirl into the dark liquid, I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you. I wasn't sure if I'd call. He nodded and waited. I slowly let out a breath and said, "I've been thinking about what you said." His face was blank, and I hesitated before meeting his eyes. "You were bright." Something flickered in his eyes, but I couldn't quite pinpoint it. "Evelyn, I'm not saying I regret my life," I said softly. "Mark and I have made something real and strong together, but I think I forgot how to want something for myself somewhere along the way." Richard leaned forward a little, and I had to swallow hard. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of faraway conversation. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quiet. "I just want you to be happy." There was no reason for him to get involved in my life or say the things he did, except that he saw something in me that not even I had seen. Suddenly, I realized I had a choice. I sat there staring at Richard across the small cafe table, my hands on my warm coffee cup. "I just want you to be happy." His words hung in the air, heavy yet gentle, like a truth I had been avoiding for years. I had told myself that happiness, security, stability, and loyalty were the building blocks of a good life, and they were, but Richard had found something else in me that I hadn't even known I was missing, a need to feel. I took a deep breath, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. Richard said, "I don't know what to do with all of this." "Ellen, you don't have to do anything. Just think about what makes you happy. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" I started to answer but stopped. When was the last time I spent decades making sure Mark was taken care of and that his job, goals, and world stayed together? I had made my life organized and regular, but what about me? I took a sip of my coffee, and the rich, bitter warmth brought me back to earth for a moment. Even I was surprised when I told Richard, "I don't know who I am outside of my marriage." He gave me a small, knowing smile and said, "Perhaps it's time to find out." I let out a nervous laugh that sounded both scary and exciting, don't you think? I didn't answer because I knew he was right. We sat in silence for a while, watching the world go by outside. Cars drove by, people laughed, and the wind rustled the golden grass. Autumn leaves. I've never stopped to think in my life, but I believe this was the first time I needed to. I put down my cup and looked into his eyes. "Though I don't know what will happen, Richard, I do know that I need to start living again." I wanted you to know that when Mark got home that night, I was already sitting at the kitchen table waiting for him. He barely looked at me as he put down his briefcase and untied his tie. "Long day," he muttered. "I'm tired." I watched him for a moment. This was the man I had built a life with and loved for decades, but as he moved around the house, there was a distance between us that I hadn't noticed growing over the years. I took a deep breath and asked, "Mark, can we talk?" He paused and finally looked at me about what I had swallowed. I thought for a moment and then said the words that had been building up in my mind since last night. "I feel invisible." Mark blinked and said, "I feel like I've spent years being the wife who supports you, keeps things running, and makes sure everything in our life stays steady. I love you, but I've lost sight of you somewhere along the way." He scowled, evidently taken aback. "Evelyn, where's this sensation coming from?" I asked. "It's been there for a long time. I just never let myself say it out loud." He sat down across from me and rubbed his face. "I didn't know you felt this way." He asked, "Have you ever wondered?" He was silent, and I realized something painful. Mark wasn't an intentionally mean or careless husband. He and I had both thought that marriage meant routine and comfort, so we didn't need to check in on each other as often as we used to. But that wasn't living. That wasn't love. That wasn't anymore. "What are you saying?" he finally asked, his voice tense. "I need to start living for me again." His face turned a little pale. "Are you leaking on me?" I thought for a moment and then shook my head. "Mark, I don't know what the future holds. but I know I can't keep looking like this, and if we want this marriage to last, something has to change. He looked at me for a long time, and for the first time in years, I saw something flicker in his eyes. He realized that maybe we could fix this. Maybe we couldn't, but I was ready to find out. For the first time in decades,